Welcome back to Unhoused and Unfiltered. I'm Sarah Rennie, the Senior Director of Advocacy and Engagement, and I am excited again to be here to talk about an incredibly important topic. But before we get there, I wanted to remind everyone to like and subscribe. We are still hitting the top 100 of Apple Podcasts, but we won't stay there without your help. Please like, subscribe, and share so we can continue to get this important information out. We don't get paid for this. Micah doesn't get paid for this. This is designed to be informational to combat some of the really awful things that we're hearing out there. And we just really need your support. And with me today is
Nick Cook, Director of Public Policy for Micah. I'm just super excited to be here as always, and the excitement behind the podcast. I've had friends reach out, I've had family reach out, I've had professors from grad school reach out, just saying it's great that we're getting that information out there, and I'm real excited about this. But like you said, we do not get paid to do this, so if you like the podcast, go to the Micah website, become a member at myhomeless.org, become a member of Micah. And if you like the podcast, like, subscribe, leave comments, share with your friends, your neighbors, your grandparents, whoever else would be interested in this podcast, because it is just a great opportunity to spread information. There's so much disinformation out there about the unhoused community. Sarah, just this past week, I was dealing with a lot of um, misinformation. I'm not going to say lies, just misinformation.
misinformation, misunderstanding, and that's why we're bringing you this particularly special episode of just Nick and I raising awareness on an issue that's really significant to our work, to the people we serve. We're going to examine the most significant shift in homeless policy that we've seen in decades. Since the Supreme Court grants past decision in 2024 and President Trump's 24/25 executive order, many communities have engaged or renewed efforts to criminalize homelessness through camping bans, increased enforcement, expanded use of civil commitment. We want to discuss how these policies, where they came from, what's happening in Michigan, and whether they actually work. And I'm lucky enough today to be working with Nick, who has been at the forefront of a couple of these local and most recent attempts to criminal homelessness. So, Nick, before we get into all the policy, let's just talk about what we mean by criminalizing homelessness.
Yeah, I think people think when you say criminal, we're going to criminalize homelessness. Oh, if you're homeless, we're going to throw you in jail. No, it's really targeted at individuals and these ordinances, state laws targeted towards individuals that just are unhoused, surviving out in the elements. I mean, these are things like no camping, no sleeping in public places, loitering, just hanging out in an area too long, trespassing, panhandling restrictions. I mean, we know the Supreme Court has ruled for many years that panhandling is a First Amendment protected right, freedom of speech. But they have aggressive panhandling ordinances, or panhandling in a restricted area, or all different types of things. And then they also have no sleeping in parked cars in parking lots. So that's really what we're talking about when we criminalize this. You and I probably would never do this because we have houses, but this is really, yes, it's equally enforced towards everybody, but it's really only aimed at the unhoused in a community. Um, you know, I, we'll talk about it more as we go on through this episode, but every time one of these criminalization of homelessness come up, there is a lot of talk about what they're seeing in the public. And a lot of times these laws or ordinances pop up when when unhoused populations rise because of lack of affordable housing. Are these I guess my question, not being the lawyer, are these really about homelessness or are they about regulating behavior in these public spaces?
Well, I think it's both. I think it's our desire not to deal with people being homeless. And as I'm not sure what people were expecting was going to happen as we gutted the public safety net and affordable housing is simply out of reach, you're going to see more and more people sleeping in the public square, which is an eyesore and inconvenient. And people do what people do, which is ask for money or maybe get aggressive because they're suddenly in space that we're not used to seeing. So it's regulating homelessness in the sense that they want to not see homelessness, but it's also regulating behavior in public spaces to sort of make those spaces only accessible to certain folks. I'm going to go back to what you said about vehicle habitation bans. If you think about these restrictions, there's really nowhere for folks to go. You can't camp, you can't ask for money, you can't sleep you can't sleep in the public square, and now you can't sleep in your car. So it's sort of saying, I don't know what you're going to do, but you can't do it here. And we're going to see an increase and are seeing an increase on both left and right of these because as we have huge income inequality, people just don't have places to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right with the income inequalities causing the lack of affordable housing and the lack of access to viable shelters, because even for those workers at the shelters, they don't receive much pay. So sometimes the people that are working in the shelters are also clients of other shelters or clients of housing choice vouchers. So we're really setting the system up so that it's hard for people to get into housing and then continue to stabilize
Well,
themselves.
and stabilization. And so what we're shifting then with these ordinances is that we're going to look at things through law enforcement, courts, citations, arrests, all of which law enforcement will tell you they have other things to be doing. There's no extra money for any of this. But instead of looking at ways to create more jobs, economic self-sufficiency, mental health supports, we are essentially criminalizing poverty by doing this, and we're going to see it more and more as there's less and less resources. I think it's important to note that on a single night in January of 2024, HUD estimates that there's more than 770,000 people experiencing homelessness. And it's the highest number ever recorded. And I will note for the northern states, because we object to this being done in January every year, it's called the point in time count, that's a vast undercount for the northern states because we know most people were trying to find some sort of shelter in a January winter night, but it's already an 18% increase.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, especially this last January when the pit count happened in 2026. Those last 2 weeks of January was absolutely bitter here in Michigan, and most communities were in code blue. And if you are couch surfing or sleeping in a car or going into an abandoned house, you're not counted as homeless. So we know those people are undercounted.
Well, and I go back to, so we know that there's a vast undercounting. We know that inflation is high, jobs are hard to get, you see people getting laid off left and right. And we know this increase is pretty much an undercount. And so that's what makes this shift so shocking in some ways. And so I want to talk to you about sort of the administration's like first decision around this shift, which I think is probably the July executive order. What did it direct federal agencies to do? I know executive orders, maybe you can explain a little bit what executive orders are because they're not laws, but it
Yeah,
did
yeah.
just indicate a whole shift.
This is where my policy wonkiness comes out at, and I get excited to talk about this. Um, but executive orders are really guidance to the administration, the executive branch on how to execute certain policies and laws. They don't have the force of law, but they kind of set the guiding principles for what the administration wants to do. And first of all, I want to say happy anniversary to the executive order. This is the 1 year mark on the executive order, and really shifted away from housing first. It said we're no longer going to do that. Um, we've put more money into the system, which dollar for dollar, they have put more money into the system, but based off inflation, it's less. We can talk about that all day. Saying it's not working. Going back to that 770,000 number that you referenced, they reference that's the highest ever. So obviously, housing first failed. They don't talk about any of the economic challenges that people are facing, or the lack of
Guts to
affordable
mental
health care. All
guts
kinds
to
of different
mental
things.
health and the fact that our healthcare system is a complete disaster.
Right.
Yeah.
I encouraged communities to have camping bans. We see this happening all across the country.
The
We see,
executive order did. It encouraged
yep,
folks to have
yep,
camping bans.
encouraged camping ban. It encouraged civil commitment, which flies in the face of decades of judicial decisions. And then prioritize treatment in institutional settings for individuals. Basically saying, if you can't get yourself off the street, we will come put you in to an institution, be it jail, be it SUD, or be it mental health, and we will now decide when you're ready um, to be back out on your own, in housing or wherever. And then it encouraged different cities, counties, municipalities to address encampments through this enforcement, working with law enforcement. Because I mean, if you read the title, it said, ending crime and disorder on America's streets. So saying all the social problems are because of the unhoused, when we know that is not true. But it's this belief of othering them. Those other people are causing the problem, which is really what the
Well,
executive order does.
and I go back to this because we talk a lot about 40% of Michigan residents live paycheck to paycheck. So could be any one of those folks anytime. So it's really saying once you have a major life event and have to live in your car, let's say, because with a family, because we're seeing a lot of families, you suddenly have lost the ability to get back on your feet. If you're
Right,
housed, you're okay. But if like you have the misfortune of having cancer, then you need to be taken care of by the government
right, and
mentally.
it's yeah. I mean, it's you see it that it had a ripple wave effect throughout federal government. We saw it in HUD, we saw it in the VA, we saw it with DOJ. We just see this executive order ending crime and disorder on America's streets just had this chilling effect on the unhoused population, basically saying you're less than other Americans.
And so, although it wasn't a law, it was a policy shift. What do you think local governments heard then when they got this policy?
Well, between the grants pass decision and the executive orders trying to tie funding to the executive order and all their NOFOs and grants, local communities heard, yep, we heard you. We need to do this.
We have
Even
permission to do this. We should do it. It's a good idea.
Yeah, and it's unfortunately, it's a little bit ill conceived, because we know in Michigan, we've talked about it on this podcast before, there isn't enough mental health beds. There's not enough substance use beds. We know sheriffs throughout the state and throughout the country do not want to house nonviolent offenders in their jails just because they're homeless.
Well, and then they're going to get out, and then it's just a matter of getting they'll have more fines and fees they can't pay. It's a cost to the jail system. It's just adding layers of law enforcement it's to what you were talking about. It's getting folks out of the public square, but
Mhm.
not necessarily solving any problems, right?
Right. It's out of sight, out of mind. We shift them somewhere else because you're talking about populations that are marginalized. They're vulnerable. If you're living on the street, I mean, it's very dangerous. You see somebody that is your age or my age, um, they look 20 years older than both of us because it's hard. And then
Well, the
when you have,
statistics do say that it's likely if you live in if you become homeless, you're likely to die 20 years sooner
yeah,
than someone who's not been who's housed.
so you have trust issues, you have safety issues, and now you're pushing these individuals when you say you can't be in this community square or this public park or this, you're pushing them into further and further out into the fringes of society, and you're decreasing their safety. You're making them recoil from people that are there to assist and to get them into services because they don't trust them because, oh, now I've talked to you, but you've just enacted a camping ban. Now I don't have anywhere to sleep. So there's this building of trust that's broken because of this executive order.
So this push, this radical shift, and I'm going to call it radical because we've had decades of, and one of the arguments we get is that we didn't solve homelessness, and homelessness is a very complicated issue. And if we needed improvements, and there always could have been improvements in the current system, we needed a scalpel, not a chainsaw, right? We needed to think through actual policy versus arresting people and pushing them to the margins. But this whole thing didn't sort of come out of the administration's brain completely formed, right? There was other institutes and think tanks that have been writing about this. And I think one of those are the Cicero Institute. Can you talk about who they are and what they propose, why they're important and what they are advocating for?
Yes. Cicero Institute was founded by Joe Lonsdale, the IT um, billionaire, helped start Palantir. Um, to really look at social problems and really as it's kind of developed, it helped write Project 2025. Basically, came to the
Ah,
conclusion that homelessness was a choice, and really pushed that the homeless industrial complex is keeping people in homelessness for their own benefit and well-being. And so they've been going around to other states saying if you and municipalities, if you ban camping, if you ban loitering, if you ban sleeping in public, your homeless problem will go away because those people will then go into treatment or into hospitalization or get into housing. They'll pull themselves up by the bootstraps, so to speak. And they are going around the country and pushing hard on state lawmakers to do things like statewide camping bans, just
so
like they did in Indiana a few months ago.
you mentioned something really important because this is obviously a well-funded shift, and I'm hearing two things. I'm hearing a lot about homelessness being a choice. And there are people who choose not to go to shelter. That's not the same as choosing to be homeless. It may be that the shelter's unsafe. But I also want to talk a little bit about they say that people will go to be civilly committed or be in hospitals. I want you to mention at the same time we've cut Medicaid for hospitals, right? And there are no beds. There's no extra money with any of this for the systems they're saying will absorb these challenges, right?
Right. I mean, it would be one thing, if you believed in this policy, which I don't, and I know from our conversations you don't, Sarah.
Right.
But if you believed in this policy and you thought it was the right thing to do, there should be more funding for law enforcement. There should be more funding for mental health beds. There should be more funding for substance use disorder. But we just don't see that. We see this othering of the unhoused, but we don't see them. We don't see the federal government actually coming in and putting more money into things like treatment. You brought up a good point about Medicaid. With the cuts to Medicaid, if you have somebody that isn't attached to Medicaid, they miss their redetermination, and then you put them into forced treatment. That hospital, that institution is not going to receive reimbursement because it's a uncompensated care. They're not getting paid back by Medicaid because the person's not eligible. So these are, again, putting unfunded mandates, as you always eloquently say, onto the local government,
I,
and onto hospitals and onto service providers.
and I
And
think we
it's
want
really
to,
tough.
I also want to highlight and I'm sorry to cut you off. Your mention about law enforcement, because we both know a lot of law enforcement. I've been training law enforcement for 2 decades. The first thing they will say to me is they're not social workers, because when I talk to them about various issues, law enforcement does not find this, many law enforcement do not find this a welcome shift, correct?
No, I mean, for example, the camping ban passed in Indiana. We'll use our neighbor to the south as an example, and the home our one of our partner organizations in Indiana was leading the charge against this statewide camping ban, and they were partnered with the Indiana Sheriff's Association, who was adamant that this wasn't going to work, that it was going to cost more, that it was going to, um, you know, suck up law enforcement time, take them off the roads, take them away from more violent crimes, and yet Indiana legislature passed it.
And again, that was sort of because there was a hard press from the Cicero Institute, lots of money, right?
Oh, lots of money. They had a full-time lobbyist in Indiana. We keep watching to see if they try to do this in Michigan. I have not seen a Cicero Institute lobbyist register yet, but that doesn't mean it isn't coming. But yeah, Indiana had a full-time lobbyist there, and their whole job was to get this camping ban passed, and it took 3 years, but they got it passed.
And you and I have talked about this in the past. Neither one of us are a fan overall of outside the state folks coming in and trying to tell state people what to do because every state is different. It's never great to have a Washington lobbyist come in and try to tell you what a solution is for Michigan. We know what we need. And so, among the other million other reasons I object in having worked with many folks out of Michigan, there is no Washington solution for Michigan.
No, and I think that's a great conversation. That locals know what's best for their community and how to best provide services. They know what's available. They know how to connect with the individuals. A lot of these are your family, your friends, people you went to high school with. Even here,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, even here in Ingham County, when I took um, a member of the city council out to an encampment, ran into a guy he went to high school with. And it really shook him to the core that these weren't other people. This was somebody he grew
He
up with.
knew. Yeah, and I think that's sort of the important conversation. And I want to talk to you about what we're seeing throughout the state because we're seeing this pop up all over the place. And you recently addressed this in East Lansing, and did some incredible advocacy. And part of that is taking people out and having them actually meet folks who are unhoused.
Yeah, I mean, in East Lansing, they were trying to develop a loitering ban and a no camping in public places, no loitering in public places, and it really, the concern was from downtown businesses that just saw homeless individuals talking to customers, and saying, well, it made them feel uneasy. And some of the individuals. And I know a lot of the unhoused individuals in East Lansing. I've met them. I've worked with them for a while now and fed them, and I'm not saying it's that there wasn't problems. That there are times when humans are going to do human things, but
I mean, there's
um,
going to be problems. There could have a problem with the students too. Like you
right,
can always have a problem, right?
right. I mean, the one thing I was told in one of the meetings was, "Well, downtown smells like marijuana and urine." I said, "You're in the fall at Michigan State University. I don't know what to tell you."
Yeah, that's
Um,
not a homeless problem.
that's not a
That's a
homeless
student
problem.
problem.
Yes, these conversations, they wanted somebody to blame. They didn't want to enforce the laws that are already out there. They went to one. They brought up an incident where a supposedly, none of this is confirmed. This is just word of mouth. A unhoused individual tore up a bathroom at a convenience store in East Lansing. There's all kinds of crimes you could have charged the person with: vandalism, destruction of property,
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
all kinds of things. So why are we creating an ordinance that says a person can't loiter? Why are we? And we know we're loitering. The historical context of where loitering came from, the ban on loitering, was a very racist law that was put in place a lot. And so when you start
Yeah,
talking when you
we
start
start
talking
talking about loitering, you're talking about really racial justice issues. It's interesting they wouldn't, and how are you going to enforce it? There's a lot of loitering on a Friday after a game that, what does that mean? Um, it's it's obviously a statement about homelessness. It's not a statement about students, you know, uh, all hanging out and, probably being publicly intoxicated. No shade to MSU students, but they have a certain there have been incidences of public intoxication in East Lansing. Um,
as a father of a graduate of MSU and one that's currently at MSU, yes, I know very well. Um,
yeah. So it's they and there was the number I think of homelessness was like three folks too that they were
yeah,
trying to address. So again, I really the performative nature and the cruelty of it I think is really important that we emphasize, particularly as we talk about the next city, because that one is even more sort of complicated in what they're trying to ban, which is I know you've been doing work now with the Jackson proposed Jackson ordinance. If you can go into some detail about what they're currently trying to ban, that would be great because I am sort of at a loss. I feel like I could be violating this ordinance by bringing like my duffel and if it gets passed, my gym duffel and a purse.
yeah. Yeah, that's so what Jackson is doing is there's an encampment of 3 to 5 individuals, maybe six, that is camped outside the Carnegie District Library, part of the Jackson District Library in downtown Jackson. The encampment has been there for some time. They are camped on the sidewalks. They're camped right by the entrance. Some people feel that this is a safety concern. So Jackson, instead of again enforcing their current laws of blocking, obstructing public access, um, they actually passed a few years ago a aggressive panhandling, which has other issues, but
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 it's
it's
on the
on their
books.
it's on the
Right.
books. Um, they've not enforced any of those laws. Instead, they decided to create an emergency order to ban camping on any public property inside the city of Jackson. And then on top of that, they also banned tents from the city of Jackson. Or sorry, let me back that up. Personal property ban. So you could not
Right.
have more than 32 gallons, which, if you think about it, is a tote that we all buy at Home Depot, Lowe's, Menards, and store stuff in. These, if you have more than that, it has to go into storage. Well, even before this got started, the practicality of how is the city going to manage this came up to me. Uh, who's going to be responsible for everybody's goods? Who's going to be the determining factor of what's more than 32 gallons? Does a bike count towards that 32 gallons? Does your dog count towards that 32 gallons?
Right.
Does I mean, this all got brought up in the city council meeting, and the city lawyer really didn't have an answer. Um, and a lot of it was left up to, well, it depends on how we enforce it. But really, it was just, even though the city of Jackson's website says this is not about homelessness, this is about personal property in public places and tents in public places, it was about homeless individuals. They aren't going to attack you or I for showing up to our kids' um, softball or t-ball game and putting
With a
up a
big
shade tent.
cooler and putting out
Yeah,
you know, chair,
but
camp chair, and a tent. Those tents that go over you when you're in the
yeah,
sun. Yeah, I've done that. So I feel like I could have been in violation, not in Jackson, but I feel like I could have been in violation of this ordinance because, as a soccer mom, you drag a bunch of crap everywhere.
yep,
Um, but selective enforcement is actually not okay, right? We're not supposed to
correct.
selectively enforce laws for a reason. We don't want to be targeting individuals. So, what is Jackson's answer to sort of like you can't selectively enforce some of these things?
You just heard that answer. It was silence. They kept saying, "Well, this applies to everyone." And one of the questions I brought about the tent ban was, it says under there, unless a individual permit has been issued, no person shall erect a tent inside of parks, public spaces, yada yada yada. And I brought that up to the mayor. I brought it up to the city attorney and said, "Well, that doesn't apply to city sanctioned events." So they said, "Well, that would be okay at a little league game because that's city sanctioned." I'm like, "That's not what your ordinance says. Your ordinance says unless it is issued to an individual, it's not permitted." And they kind of just shrugged their shoulders and said, "Well, our police would use their judgment and
Again,
not."
law enforcement doesn't want to be doing this. They don't want to be deciding if it's a soccer mom or a homeless person. They want to know if the bad guy's done bad things and if they can get to crime that's significant. Can
Yeah,
I ask, though, one of the things that struck me listening, because I watched the entire city council meeting, which was bless you for staying up and there the whole time because it was long. There was a lot of two things. There was a lot of folks who were concerned about safety, and I've seen this breathlessness and deep concern. I don't want to minimize that because there probably is some safety concerns, but you say there's only like three or four people. Again, enforcement could be if there was actual harassment. There's probably a something on the books, correct?
yeah. I mean, again, we go back to the aggressive panhandling ordinance that they had to pass a few years ago because they said panhandling was out of control. One of the businesses said one of the employees had their car stolen. Now, they likened it to, they said, it was the homeless, but you and I both know the chances of a stolen car from a homeless individual living in an encampment in front of the library is probably very minimal.
Yeah,
Um,
and let's talk about why that is. People aren't going to steal a car and then come back to an encampment. They would
right.
steal a car and go live in the car or disappear. So and most folks in an encampment aren't, looking to, what you see sometimes is a rise in petty crime. You're not
Correct.
looking at grand theft auto.
Right. And so, I mean, obviously there was no real connection between the encampment and safety there. And then, there were concerns about walking downtown. But the one thing I asked a few of the city council members and the city attorney was, have you gone out there and talked to the individuals at the encampment? Have you met with them, seen what they need? And the resounding answer was no. I've walked past it. Which
Wow.
again, that goes back to the othering. Those are other people over there, and I just don't know. I mean, they are human. We have to make that connection. You have to understand what the needs are before you can go ahead and start legislating um,
Well, and
how to
strictly
do
from
it.
an economic, it's cheaper if there are 4 or 5 people living in front of your library, figuring out what they may need to be able to get temporary housing or shelter than it is to pay law enforcement and buy a bunch of bins and have a big fight about what constitutes, public property. It's not a practical solution. And I was struck by that ordinance meeting in that or that hearing that there were several city council folks who said we are not in the business of doing social services. And that is
Right.
the first I've heard of that.
Right. And they kept saying, well, our job is to protect our citizens. Well, I would argue that making sure people have safe and affordable housing is protecting your citizens. And I would have that argument all day long. But yes, I was told by a couple, we don't do social services. This is a problem for the nonprofits. But nonprofits, they receive the funding they get, and that's about it. There's no stream coming from the state. There is a little bit of federal money, but it's not enough. I go back to the city of Jackson purchased a container, storage container, at $6,000. If you're talking even 6 people at the encampment, that could be rent for an entire year. Uh, so they
Yeah,
have money to do things. They just don't have money to do.
I was gonna say we could do a lot to help those folks with that 6 grand. Like you and I are really good at, making a dollar stretch. And there are other advocates, I'm sure, who could do the same in Jackson. Um, it is really indicative, like you said, that no one's spoken to them. No one's seen what they need. Do they have mental health issues? Are they getting their Social Security? All the things that might help them to long-term stability. Again, it's cheaper long term to deal with the problem directly because let's say they do succeed in this ordinance, they're just going to be moved to a different part of the city, or what happens when you break up an encampment?
Yeah, that's exactly. I was just talking to a Jackson shelter the other day, and they said we weren't part of the discussion. Nobody came to us and said, what do they need? What can we do to support you getting these people off the streets? And I said I counter argued with, or I then proposed that exact same question to the shelter was if they enforce this ban and they sweep them further out into a township or into the rural area of Jackson County, how are you going to connect them to services? How are you ever going to get them off the street? How are you ever going to ensure that they don't become a frostbite victim or an extreme, heat exhaustion victim? And they said, "We'll never know, Nick." And that's the thing is you're pushing people further and further out of sight, out of mind.
And when I ran my homeless shelter, I was always surprised when people were shocked when we'd have a death in the really cold winters. And it happens pretty regularly that we lose folks who are sleeping rough. And so when Nick and I talk about this being life or death, this is really about people's lives. And so we really need to decide, are we a society that's going to say we're not doing social services, we're not helping people? Because your consequence for doing that is pretty dire. People do die from the elements.
Yeah, and and again, it goes just back to the practical application of these ordinances of these criminalization. Who are you going to pick and choose? Is somebody that's homeless or somebody that's just coming to or from their job or just having a picnic in the park, or you really are saying if you are unhoused, you're less than the rest of the community. You need to move on.
So
And
where did Jackson leave it? And how can
that
folks get involved?
Yes. So it was an emergency order. So they needed 6 of the 7 voting members of the city council to pass it. It was evident after that night, after a lot of discussion and a lot of conversation I had and some of our other partners had through the day, they didn't have the 6 votes. So they voted to remove the emergency order and put it on first reading and pass it on first reading. So it'll be up for second reading in on August 18th. And then if it passes then it would be go into effect at the end of September, beginning of October, I think. Um,
So the long
but
and the short of it, it's not an ordinance yet. And if folks want to get involved, they should get involved and let us know and attend, the Jackson City Council meetings and let your objection to this process be heard, right?
correct, correct. I mean, because if it's going to happen in Jackson, it's going to happen in, you name the city across the state.
Well, so that was going to be my next question. Like, this isn't, these are two instances. Why should other folks care? But I would say that we're seeing a lot of press about Ann Arbor panhandling, right?
right,
Um, it seems to be somebody's laying a foundation that it's out of hand.
right, and that's the thing is, the these articles, these stories. A lot of it starts on social media and kind of snowballs because you get a lot of pushback on social media. A lot of it's based on thoughts and beliefs, not on reality, and that's kind of where the Jackson um, thing came from. Was all on Facebook, and then the same thing
Always a
with
reliable place to get your
yeah.
your news, by the way. Yeah. Kidding.
And really kind of the same thing is happening in Ann Arbor. The question really comes is it more so than normal? And are they violating any current laws? Um, and I always go back to if somebody's harassing you, there's laws on the book. If somebody's assaulting you, there's laws on the book. If they're, um, there's lots of laws on the book. And just to create a law to protect so-called housed people versus against unhoused people approaching them. It just
Well, when you put it that way, that's you're right. Like, so your message is avoid the like breathless hyperbole and actually find out what's going on.
right, right. And I think it's conversation, and I think that's why you and I really started this podcast. Is you spent a lot of time in this field before coming over to Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness, but I was a relative newbie, just did street outreach and, cared about the unhoused population of Michigan. But you and I had a lot of conversations as we both first started, even though I'm senior by 1 week.
That's
Um,
well, I'm not sure senior. You were hired first.
but, we had these conversations and I think having these conversations, having talk to people about what you're seeing in encampments. What do what does it mean to be unhoused? Why are people unhoused? These are conversations we just don't have anymore, and that people are left to make up their own decisions. I go to a story of my daughter who's going into her sophomore year at Michigan State. She told me that she was walking downtown East Lansing with a friend, and a homeless individual came forward and asked her for money. She said, "Nope, sorry, don't have any." And her friends couldn't believe that she was just up front and talked to him. And she said, "They're just like us. It's not a big deal. Just tell them you don't have any money and just move on." And
Yeah.
look them in the eye, treat them like a human, and it's done. So many times we allow our biases to drive our decision making versus actually
Well, and
understanding where somebody's coming from.
and there's also the messaging and the fear now that's reinforcing that, like you said. So let's talk about money. We sort of covered this, but these policies, in addition to we think being inhumane, they don't they're not actually cheaper, correct?
No, they always cost more. Even you look at the per day cost in a Michigan jail, it's between $90 and $110 a day in a Michigan jail versus, the $19 per day per diem that
Wow, what
shelters,
a difference.
yeah, that shelters get to house people. Um, it's just even if the city itself wanted to invest $19 or the county, they would save money against this policy. So that's really what it comes down to. And we know when you force somebody into treatment, they're less likely to stay with it. So now you're just taking up a bed, you're costing more money to the system. And then also people with the cuts to the social safety net, they're less likely to get help. So then it's more costly care, and it just snowballs. So
And I know you've covered this mostly, but if not for cost, and we've already said there's books, laws on the books for safety, why is this happening then?
political pressure, the belief that housing first isn't working, people that don't want to address the real causes of homelessness. We, in our last couple podcasts ago, we had Professor Lion Callow, who talked about, the lack of investment in housing and the lack of community. So it's a lot of misunderstanding, I believe. We could talk all day about this, but we are coming up to the end
Well, I do
of
think we
our.
should end real quick, though, Nick. We've told a lot about what doesn't work. What do you want folks to come away with what does work, if you could recap?
What does work is the continuum of care. That's from street outreach to transitional housing to supportive services to permanent housing to rapid rehousing to housing choice vouchers. We know that if you give somebody the ability and the wraparound services they need to be successful, in Michigan, 95% of people are taken care of. We know that they stay housed. Um, but there needs to be investment and it needs to be a conversation versus criminalizing somebody for trying to survive.
And I would just add the other thing that works is community connections, like you said, relationships, connecting with folks. I encourage as we folks to go listen to our podcast that featured Lisa Reinecke from True North. She's doing amazing work and her success rate is really high. And part of it is because she's so centered in her community, understands her community, and makes those connections. I think this is an ongoing conversation for us, Nick, so I really appreciate the opportunity. Um, Anything you'd like to add before we close out?
No, I just, if you like this podcast, like and subscribe, leave a comment, share it with anybody. Because this is important. This is a part of the conversation. It's not just Sarah and I talking here. It's to get the word out about what it means to be unhoused in Michigan. So thank you, Sarah, for bringing this conversation forward.
Yeah, and thank you. And please remember to join Micah at myhomeless.org. And again, like and subscribe, and we will see you next week.